We all know that the right habits and mindsets can be transformational in how we live our lives. But among the sea of advice online, it can be challenging to know who to trust with these important life decisions. At The Standard, we answer those questions and introduce you to some of the most successful people in the world in their fields and the habits and the mindsets they use to achieve their success. To learn more about our social platform, head on over to www.thestandardapp.com. And now, your host, myself, Chris Pallatroni. All right, welcome to another episode of The Standard. Today we have an amazing guest in Abby DeGraff. I first met Abby a little over a year ago as I was working on the platform, and she was so kind to contribute to what we're working on, and we really just hit it off. I think you'll see why in this podcast. She has a very infectious personality. She has such a positive aura about her. But Abby is an amazing person. She has a lot of different things that she's working on. She is a certified fitness coach. She is a fitness nutrition specialist and a personal trainer. She recently started Uncommon Wellness, which is a fitness holistic lifestyle brand. And as she says, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. So she shares a lot of the things that are supporting her and really provides a platform in which she can help people out there looking to deal with life and become the best versions of themselves. Her most recent adventure is releasing the Uncommon podcast, which shares a lot of practical tips and advice on things that she's going through and things that she sees affecting a lot of her clients. So you're definitely going to want to tune into that. And in this particular episode, we talk about the most important habit that she has. She is a mom of 4 boys, so lots of love in that house. You're going to want to stay tuned if you have children. She provides some very practical advice. She also talks about her top mindset as well, what really supports her and her success as an entrepreneur, as a mom, as a wife. So you're definitely going to want to listen to that. Had a lot of fun with this podcast. Abby is amazing, and we're definitely going to have to invite her back for a sequel to this. So without further ado, welcome, Abby DeGraff. Oh my God. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. It is, what is it, 11:42 over here. I had a podcast.
Early.
Yeah.
Zone.
Yeah. I had a podcast earlier today with an amazing woman out of the Netherlands. A little bit of work. I'm going to go for a 13-mile run when I'm done talking with you. So, it's just wham, bam.
Just a light run, Chris.
You love actually being in the gym and physically working out. My personal trainer will hate me for saying this, but I don't like actual weightlifting. I do it as a byproduct to run more, but running in nature is my detox in life. So that's what I need.
You and my husband both. And you know what? I used to be that way too. I started in running.
Okay.
And started in endurance. My husband does ultra marathons, and I was never that crazy, but I used to do a lot of endurance running. And then I hung up my running shoes to try to put on some muscle, and I kind of fell in love with that area, and I haven't looked back. But there is something to be said about just getting into nature, and it's a different kind of experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine ultra running because that is not. I'll stop at a marathon, and I don't run those all that often. But yeah, any excuse to be in nature. I'm a gardener, so anything I can do with like nature, plants, like there's so many positive effects that has. But first of all, thank you so much. I have been dying to like just dig into your life and like know more.
Yeah.
Obviously we communicate a lot over the last year. We've shared books. We're both doing podcasts now. I think we have a love for not just living a healthy lifestyle, but helping as many people as they can live a healthy lifestyle. And so I think broadly speaking, like, so much about habits. Like, you put it on your website, you are clearly you're drinking the Kool-Aid on habits. I got to know, like, why are they so important to you? Like, I guess that's probably the first thing. Why are habits just so important to what you do and your success?
Great question. Probably a lot to unpack there. And, I will say, I think habits are so important to me almost by default. I come from I've been fit and healthy my whole life. I think I've always been somebody who's been disciplined in habits. Growing up, I did sports, and I've never had a problem being intrinsically motivated as a person. But there was a time in my life where I let my discipline turn to a disorder. So I've overcome a couple, multiple eating disorders that happened back in college. And I think in my mind, I was always chasing this outcome. I was always chasing something that was always, 12 yards ahead of me. And I think we live in such an outcome-based society altogether. And I think what really changed for me, well, I picked up the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. A friend recommended it to me. And by this time, I was already kind of immersed in changing some habits in my life. And, I wanted to become the architect of my life versus the victim of some habits that were no longer serving me. And his book really, really impacted me in a way that no other book has. And from that point on, in my own life and also how I coach women, I think being so outcome focused kind of doesn't allow us to enjoy that journey. And so it's the, the adage of, tiny habits, remarkable results, right? Those tiny things that we do daily are really what add up to any transformation, whether it be physical, whether it be mental, whether it be spiritual. And kind of taking that practice and running with it has changed everything for me in my life, and also how I sort of operate as a parent with my kids and with my clients. And so I think habits are they've given me the biggest bang for my buck, the biggest reward. And they also are fluid. Obviously, I have my habits that are kind of my foundation to wellness. But I think as we evolve and as we expand and we change and grow, those habits have to be fluid. And that's how we can architect them in our life versus, falling victim to a habit that, maybe once served us and no longer does.
Yeah. I don't remember if it was exactly the James Clear book, which is clearly a phenomenal book if you're just trying to understand like sort of the science of habits. But I remember, and I think it was his book, that, he said about 90% of our life is on automatic. I think he used slightly different words in it. But if you can just appreciate that, like, even if you're not somebody that really embraces habits, and just sort of maybe take the leap of faith on that of like, wow, 90% of what we do as a human in all of our time, daily, weekly, monthly, is habitual. Whether that's a good, positive habit or it's a negative one, that is so. I think that was one of the first like habit facts I learned of like, oh my God, like I need to be more aware of like, are these good things that I'm doing or bad things I'm doing? And so I think I was just mind blown off that. And I think that was sort of my first introduction to like, yeah, man, let's be the architect, the programmer, the author. Like, let's get control of this thing. Cause if not, like you can lose a lot of time really fast.
Yeah, you really can. And what's interesting is there's two sides of that, because I think, automating things can play to our advantage in so many ways. And even some of the things that I used to automate in my life, when I kind of changed my trajectory and what the goal was for me, they were no longer fitting, So I think you're right. That constant process of self-awareness and auditing is really important.
So I guess a question before we dive into any of your particular habits. You coach people. You coach people for a variety of different things, lifestyle, nutrition, fitness. I mean, you really take more of a holistic approach of, we're not any one of these things, we're all of these things. How do habits play into like the way you coach people? Like, I have to imagine it plays in quite heavily, I would think.
Absolutely. I would say it's at the foundation of everything that I do and how I coach. And what's ironic is, when most people come to me, they have a very outcome focused mentality.
Totally.
It's like someone comes to me and they want to lose 30 pounds, or they want to put on muscle, or they just want a healthier relationship with food. And so they're focused on this end goal, this outcome. And so often I kind of have to rewire their thought process. And that's why I'm really passionate about mindset. Yeah. And, I think if we can control our inner narrative, that really controls how we show up. And that does take some rewiring. And so getting them to focus on the process and the daily wins, not only does that allow us to find more joy in the journey, whatever that outcome may be, it also allows them to pay attention to so much more than one myopic view of growth. And, if someone wants to lose 30 pounds and they're so fixated on, a scale weight or the way that they look in the mirror, but they're not focused on their daily habits, they're missing, the fact that they nailed their first pull up and, they're getting stronger in the gym and they're having more energy with their kids. And I think habits give us the ability to do that. They allow us to hone in on the little micro moments in our life. And isn't that kind of what it's all about? That adds up to the big picture.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest struggles I have. It's actually part of my vision board for this year is enjoy the journey. Because, whether we're talking about fitness or nutrition, we could certainly apply this to being an entrepreneur. I know, we've got a lot of things you got going on over there, and it's so easy to be like, well, when my podcast comes out, or when I get my first client, or when I hit this revenue mark, or when I do this. And like the inevitability of those things is there's always a next marker. Like it never ends. Like, it's just like, I was sharing this.
It's 10 yards ahead, always.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think it's hard for people to recognize that it is the journey and the process you have to fall in love with, because those are all those moments that sort of like add together, that euphoric feeling you're going to have when you reach the top of the hill or you make this milestone from weight or whatever. It's a fleeting feeling. It will only be there for so long. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a year, but it will go away. And all you have left is that journey that you hopefully you're enjoying what you're on. And so, yeah, it's a challenging thing to embrace, but certainly something I recognize the value in.
Yeah. And don't you think something that goes along with that is just understanding delayed gratification? I mean, I think about all these little habits that they really seem so minuscule sometimes. It's like, really, going to bed an hour earlier, like, how is that going to transform my life? Or how is drinking more water every day gonna give me this end result that I still am focused on? But they're hard. Those little tiny decisions every day, and especially if we're doing multiple, healthy habits, they're hard to do. They're hard. And I think that we can simplify them, but they're difficult. And so being able to kind of delay gratification through the journey, I think it's an important skill to hone. I'm still working on it.
Oh my God, it's a work in progress. And speaking of that, I remember, when I first started this project on working on the standard, I didn't always wake up so early in the morning. And maybe it was Tim Ferriss that I was listening to, but the 10,000 hour rule, right? And it's not exactly 10,000 hours. It's more like 10,000 deliberate hours. It's very intentional training, not just going through the motions. But I remember listening to a podcast, I think it was Tim Ferriss, that was more of like, hey, yes, maybe 10,000 hours to become world-class in something, but you can get really, really good at something in like 1,500 hours. Like, I mean, really, really good, right? It's sort of like the 80-20 rule of, to reach that upper echelon may take that last 2,000-3,000 hours, but like that first 1,000 to 2,000 hours can make you really good at a topic. And so I started to do the math. I was like, well, what if you had 2 hours a day, which is a big number, 2 hours a day. If I forego 2 hours of sleep over the course of a year, 365 days, I mean, you're 800 hours in. And so, I mean, you're a year and a half away from being like really, really good at something, playing the flute, photography, coding. It wouldn't matter what you pick. And it's just, I mean, 2 hours a day is a big number, but I started to look at that of like, wow, a tiny sacrifice, if I can stay diligent with it over a good chunk of time, can make a really meaningful impact on a particular discipline or skill you're trying to develop. Not easy by any stretch, but we're noteworthy in the fact that like it doesn't take years and years to become really good and to see that result kick in.
Right. Yeah. And same thing. I mean, with James Clear's book, it's the whole idea of, 1% better every day, and compound interest. Nobody wants to think like that. No. And when you break it down, it just, those little things matter so much. And I also think that the value in being able to understand that and keep and continue on is when you do start to see, the fruits of your labor visible and you feel that change. And everybody wants it fast. Everyone wants all their habits to transform them overnight. It's like the whole Amazon Prime society that we live in. And the reality is it does take time, but 1% better every day. If you can hone in on that day and do everything that you can in that day that is serving the goal, then you're winning.
Did you ever play, this is going to sound so silly when I say this, but did you ever play like Mario Brothers, like one of the,
yeah.
Okay. So there's the old school. So this is totally dating me as I say this out loud, but I think about it often, is there's a trick in Mario Brothers, like the first one, I think it's like Mario 1 or whatever, where you can like jump on something and it gives you like 200 points. And you could sort of like trap this little, I don't know, it's like a duck or a ghost or whatever. And if you jump, you can sort of hang in the air long enough that it gets back up and you hit it again. And it goes from like 200 points to 400. Now you got to keep jumping and you got to keep landing on it. But if you do that, I think like 8 times in a row, you get a 1-up. And every jump thereafter, once you hit the 1-up, is another 1-up. And so you're getting these lives. Now you got to make it through 8 successful jumps before you get the 1-up, which is sort of like the compound interest. It doesn't feel like a lot in the moment, but you do hit this point, this tipping point where once you get to that 8, and maybe it's like a habit, once you've stacked, 5 or 6 meaningful habits, every one thereafter has this compound effect that just ripples through. And so I think of habits in a lot of similar ways, that like building that base layer, those first 5 to 8 are not very glorious sometimes. And they're really fundamental. Maybe it's nutrition, or maybe it's journaling or mindfulness. But if you do that right and you're diligent, you get the 1-up, and then every one after that has this massive compound effect. And then you get like 100 lives and you're like, yay.
Right. And you can't skip that time that it takes to get the 1-up.
Yeah.
Like you gotta build those foundations first, because everybody wants the 1-up. They want the outcome without the work. And if we can, continue to remind people that the magic's in the work, that foundation. And then yes, like those are there, those pillars are there. And I think other habits just become a lot easier.
Yeah. All right. Enough with Mario Brothers. Let's dive into you. So like, I know some of your habits because you've shared them on the standard, and thank you for that. But I am so curious, like you've got a wealth of knowledge behind you. You coach people. What is your best habit? Like, what is the one that really supports you the most from a mental health, a success perspective, that you can't live without?
This is the question that was really interesting for me to kind of dissect, because the easy answer is, well, I have too many to list the one. And, I think for me, my number one habit that reaps the most value for me and has a catalyst effect on everything else that I do is my morning routine. It's everything that I do from the hours of 4 a.m. to the time my kids are awake, which is typically 6:37. It's my quiet hours when it's just me in the dark. And we can kind of talk about what that looks like. But if I were to pick one habit that has had a domino effect over my entire wellness, it's waking up early. And it's that 2 hours of my morning routine before the world can get to me.
So before we go into like tactically what you're doing, this is very much like my wife. So she was my first guest on the podcast, and we did a test a couple of years ago with this particular habit. And man, when she talked about her morning routine, which I think there's some similarities into what you do, like so many, she's got a dominant female audience with her being in the beauty space. So many other women were like, oh my God, me too. So for the rationale behind it. So before we go into like tactically, like what you do and, how do you wake up that early and what exactly are you doing? I think I know a little bit of it because you've shared it. But talk a little bit about like, why is this so important for you? Like why the hell wake up in the middle of the night? I mean, 4 o'clock is no joke. I know I wake up early too. Like it's not easy. Like we're tired. It's dark out for many hours, but like, why is this so critical to your success?
Yeah, good question. And it's funny because as critical as those morning, early, dark hours are, it means so many things have to transcend the night before, right? But for me, I'm a mom and I have 4 kids. So I'm a mom of 4 boys, 4 wild, busy, rambunctious boys. And so much of my life is, that balancing act of motherhood first and also building something outside of motherhood that I'm passionate about, which is my coaching practice. And I cannot pour into my family, my kids, my husband, my people without pouring into myself first. And I've realized that I could easily, sleep in till 7:30 when my kids are awake and kind of become reactive to the day. And don't get me wrong, there are mornings when I do sleep in and something happens the night before and I don't love the way that I wake up reactive. But if I can control those hours, I feel like I am setting myself up to show up my best in the world. And so much of that is in my motherhood. So much of that is in my physical health, my coaching practice. And it's the whole oxygen mask theory, right? It's like put your own oxygen mask on first. And I realized, I don't know if sometimes I think I'm wired a little differently. I don't know if everybody out there has as much drive to do all the things I do, or maybe they're on a different wavelength, right? But I think honing in on what matters to me and the things that I need to do to be able to get there required more than just, 30 minutes in my car after school drop off, catching my breath. It requires more mindfulness. It requires moving my body so that I'm not, sandwiched trying to fit that in among a day that gets too full, or, carving time to write down my thoughts before I do become reactive or the world takes over. It is so important to me to have that time and to be able to see the difference in the way that I show up for myself and others when I don't have that time.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you that. We're going to bounce around a little bit on this one, but talk a little bit about what does it feel like when you don't get that?
Yeah.
Me and
Well,
my wife talk about this all the time. Today, unfortunately, is the day she did not get this. I made her coffee. I put it by the bed at 3:45, and she chose to not wake up, and she is unfortunately dealing with the side effects of that today. But for you, what does that feel like? Like if you don't do it, what happens?
yeah. I mean, obviously it does happen. And ironically, I preach the value of sleep so much that I'm also very aware that if I have a late night and I'm awoke, my child wakes me up and I don't get my full at least 7 hours of sleep, it's probably not in my best interest to go deadlift that morning, right? At 5 a.m. And I'm very aware of that. And so sometimes it's by choice. I'm choosing to sleep in, all knowing that that time is going to sleep. But then there are moments when, earlier this week, my alarm just didn't go off. And I woke up to a child over me saying, "Mom, we're late." And of course, you just wake up, and everybody's running late. And it, put me kind of in a frenzy. So then my kids are more anxious. And it was almost this fire alarm that was going off inside of me. And the whole rest of the day, I was playing catch up. And not even from like a tactical perspective of all the things I had to do on my to-do list, but I also felt like mentally and emotionally, I was just behind. And those days happen. I use the term with my clients. Sometimes we call them like a wash day, or you have, a wash week, your kids are sick all week. And I think another thing that I talk a lot about is, we have stubborn goals, but we have to have flexible methods. And so in any time where a day transpires that is out of my control and I become reactive, the only thing I can do to have that be a lesson is to think, what do I need to do to prevent that from happening again? But inevitably, the life of a parent, it will. And it just instills even more the need that I have to do it, and I would say that, the more you do a habit, the easier it does become. It's one of those things that's habitual to me now. And but I forego a lot the night before to make sure that that can happen for me. I sacrifice at night to be able to make sure that I arise when I need to arise.
So what time are you going to bed now? What's your bedtime?
So my goal is to be in bed by 8. Now,
Okay.
I've gotten in this habit with my 8-year-old. We're doing headspace. So
Okay.
we'll do headspace together. We'll do a little meditation. But I am going to bed now earlier than my twins, who are 11. I'm at the point where I'm realizing, okay, I'm going to eventually have teenagers. I'm going to have boys who, it's like mom's out at 8:00 and I have to be okay with, them ransacking the kitchen or whatever, but they know. And, my whole family is just aware that mom's in bed. And my husband he's getting a little bit better, but we also kind of have different hours. He's up a little bit later.
Okay.
So we'll kind of do our thing together. And then I go to bed before he does. And he's not up as early. But I've realized that I can't bend for my family. It's so important to me that they kind of know mom's rules, and it is what it is. But yeah, I would say 8:00 in bed, 8:30, I'm out on a good night.
We're on the identical schedule. I wake up just slightly before you. But man, I think a lot about it. My kids, I can get away with it now. I have an 11 and a 9-year-old, but I'm like, my 11-year-old is I want to stay up a little later. And I recognize how many more years can I force them to go to bed at 8:00? And I think the same thing, they're just going to ransack the refrigerator, eat a bunch of candy, watch YouTube. I have no control. Maybe they sneak out of the house. I've got to think of all these other safeguards, because now I can force them to go to bed. And look, it's not hard in the fall time, but let's be honest, in the summertime, it's light when we go to bed. It's still light outside. And my kids are I hear kids in the street, and I'm just ignore them.
Last night my youngest is 5, and we might have to do part 2. There's a lot of my habits. My youngest, who's 5, has autism, and he's my greatest teacher always, but we have him on a very strict schedule, and his bedtime is even earlier than my other boys. So he goes to bed, his wind down routine starts at 7:15, but there are literally kids playing baseball in my front yard screaming, and his window faces it. And last night he's looking out the window, opening the blinds. And he's like, everyone's outside playing. So it's, noise canceling headphone or a sound machine and very dark curtains have been a lifesaver for us.
Yeah, that's so, just as you were talking, I'm like, my God, I'm going through the same thing over here. But you brought up a lot of really good points. And I think one of them, especially with people that have morning routines and ones that start somewhat early in the morning, is that routine starts with your nighttime routine. It starts the day before. And I don't know about you, but I've got to prime the coffee machine and put the clothes I'm going to wear out and set up my laptop or whatever it is that I'm going to do, because I don't want to do that in the morning. I don't want to wake up and, have another excuse as to oh my God, it's going to take me 45 minutes to get all this stuff ready. So what's that look like for you? You've got this routine that almost kicks in before your morning routine, which is the night. So just walk us through, what exactly do you do other than you go to bed at 8:30, the family sort of understands that, what other mechanical things are you doing to set yourself up for success the next day?
Yeah. Okay, I'll walk you through the whole thing. And I will say before I do, to your point, it's really interesting how sometimes people think they just need more willpower or more discipline or motivation, when really they just need to prime their environment better for success. So let's talk about that. My nighttime routine, obviously I'm in bed by 8. I cannot go to sleep with messes. So I'm the OCD parent in the kitchen, making sure everything's clean. But because I train early in the morning, I'm filling my water bottles, my watch is charged. I do take some supplements at night to help me sleep. Everything, I take magnesium and Beam, a sleep aid. And that's kind of been part of my ritual at night. And I'll sip on that at night. It's changing a little bit. And this is where it's stubborn goals, flexible methods. My kids they need me more at night. So as much as I want to dedicate that time to maybe reading a book for myself or doing some nightly journaling, I now bump that to my morning, because I want to be able to give my kids that time at night. I mentioned my 8-year-old wants to watch Headspace, but that's a calming activity that we can do together. And being able to kind of just be present, I think, is really important for me at night. No screens. And that one's hard.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the hard habits? I really try to dock my phone 2 hours before I go to bed. Now, am I always successful? No, because as you know, as an entrepreneur and, I have clients or I have things come in last minute, I try my hardest to not be working and not be, staring at a screen or staring at my computer very close to bedtime, because I know it affects my sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but I think screens either at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, forget like what they do to your brain. But like, I think a little bit more from the lens of like, what happens if you catch an email that you didn't want to catch? I mean, you're just not shutting that out. Like your whole night is tainted. Your whole morning is tainted. So it's like, I don't know. I just always recognize, like, be very cautious of like the news article that you're going to like click into or the email, like, because if it's not something you want to necessarily see, it literally can set you off and literally taint whatever it is that's about to go down. And I don't know. It can be really challenging.
It can. And it's very interesting because it's the whole idea of you're letting the world in before you take time to figure out what is my intention for today? What is my focus? And, I have a lot of balls I'm juggling in the air. Yeah. And I think I've learned by trial and error and a lot of mistakes that if I don't set my own intention, everything's a priority. And oftentimes I can start working on 5 different projects at once, or I can become reactive to one email that is taking away from my main focus. And I think that's huge. I think that's a lesson that all of us need to learn, but cultivate what that looks like in our own lives. We live in such a digital world, and many of our businesses are online. And with that is just a blessing and a curse. And that's something that I really, really have to be mindful of, or I'm a victim.
Yeah. So your morning routine starts the night before. You walked us through that. You wake up at 4. You talked a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, from going to the gym to journaling, but just walk us through like what's happening in the first, because I think you become mom around 6:30, 7 o'clock. That's when you take on that role. So you've got your 2.5 power hours here. Like, what is transpiring in these hours?
Yeah. This has also shifted a little bit in the last couple of years based on my ability to execute these things. And I now have a window during the day that I can kind of postpone one of the things I was doing in the morning. But I think oftentimes, let me just say, I think sometimes we think of morning routines and we look at other people doing it, especially in the wellness industry. And some of them are complex and some of them require a lot of different steps. And what I've realized as a busy mom is that mine is simple, but it's very impactful. And so there's really nothing frilly about it. I mean, I wake up at 4, I get dressed in the dark, I leave in the dark, and my journaling has now turned into, I have literally a Rolodex on my phone. And so instead of, journaling with a pen in this light room with an ambiance, I'm in a dark car and I'm journaling in my phone because that's practical for me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I also don't get to a journal. I love to write. That's a passion of mine that, you'll see through some of my content, but I do love to write. But I found that my time to write is no longer in the morning, but I can at least write my intention for the day and I can write my gratitude list in my phone. And what's cool is I now have all of these bookmarked lists of gratitude that I can refer back to if I need to. Anyway, so I actually do that right when I pull into the gym. It's still dark. And what I've realized is movement is so important to me. And it's one of those things that I cannot do with my children around very well, the way that I train now. And so I kind of looked at all these habits and I thought, what are some of these things that are just a non-negotiable? I can't really do them around my kids the way that I'm training now. And one of those is working out. And so I do, I leave my home and I'm going to the gym. And, even my gym routine has is habitual. So I spend a lot of time, warming up. I walk, and I do a very dynamic warm up and mobility. And then I get into the meat of the training. And I also do a cool down. Something that's really important to me is parasympathetic breathing. And that's something that I never really thought about for years. I would leave the gym sweaty, tired, and just run out the door and literally jump right back into crazy motherhood. And so it's like fight or flight, right? And being able to switch gears and give myself that time to get back to a parasympathetic state is everything. And it's changed a lot in my daily life. And that's a practice that, oftentimes my clients that are training with me learn really quickly. That's just part of the game. So whether it's in a sauna, whether it's just on the gym floor on a mat, taking that time to take at least 5 minutes to do some breath work. And then I am off and I'm headed home, and I typically drive home without music. I drive home in the quiet, it's light, and I'm home for my babies to get them ready for school.
Yeah. There's a few things you mentioned here I think that are super important to point out. One is so much of like developing the right routine is just trial and error.
Absolutely.
And it just changes over time. Like, and as much as I think there's value in sort of seeing where somebody's routine is at and maybe copying it to start, I think what you have to recognize is like all routines are completely customized to the individual. Like I thought like, oh, I'm supposed to journal. Like they say gratitude is the golden lens in which you look at life. And I believe that, but I don't like putting pen to paper as much. And so in my runs, I would incorporate that at a certain point. Hey, last quarter mile, let's take the headset off and let's focus on that. And so there's just, I think, these little ways that you can sort of fine tune what you do. Also, some people aren't good at physical activity in the morning, right? Like your chronotype can play a huge role into it. Is like, what are the optimal hormonal rhythms in which you should tap into intellectual work versus physical work? And I'm not a morning person for that. I tried to run 9 miles in the morning and I found out that I really enjoy sunlight and I don't enjoy running in the dark, although I could do it. And so I've switched to more intellectual work in the morning. But just the ability to fine tune and find out what works for you and what doesn't, I think is really critical. But I think the one thing you said in all of this that I think anybody should take away is the fact that, like you said, and I'll morph your words a little bit, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And like, I am a massive believer in that. I don't care who you are or what your routines or habit like, but if you want to give your best to yourself or your partner or your family or your community or your country or whatever you want to do, like you have to find a way to take care of yourself, because putting that oxygen mask on somebody else before you, yes, you may get it on, but you're only going to ever put on one oxygen mask on somebody else, and that will be the end of that. And so I think that's beautiful. It's just finding what works for you, and if you take care of yourself, you'll have more to take care of the next. And I think that's great.
Absolutely. And something that you said just about, making your routine yours, I think that is really, really important. And that's the beauty of curiosity. And, I think all of us are very aware of what a healthy habit is, but the ability that we have and the desire that we have to, how much of that is going to take place in our routine and when. And, I think I have clients who absolutely are like you, like they're not going to be up at 4 a.m. and their best time to be focused and do the work is in the morning. And that's great. That's okay. And so that's why there's no blueprint for a healthy morning routine. There's no blueprint for optimal health. I think there's so much nuance in wellness itself. And the real beauty comes when we get to define that. Yeah. And we get to have the knowledge, but we also get to cultivate that curiosity, through trial and error and really figure out, okay, this works for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And what works for you now may change, especially as you become a mom or you move.
Hey, I hope even in the next year, I'm sleeping in a couple hours because I will now have a time block when my youngest is in school full time. And, times are fluid, and what works in one season will probably need to be altered and adapted in another.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit from habit to mindset. And, I think you'll agree here, like habits are great, but all things start with mindsets, because clarity is the key to determine what it is you want to do and where you want to be. And so, I'm sure you have a lot of really good mindsets. I read a lot of your posts, but what would you say is like the mindsets that serves you the best? Like, which one helps you out the most at this point?
Currently,
Yeah.
like right in this moment, one thing that probably serves me the most in my current season is all or something versus all or nothing. And, I think coming from a place where I used to be very black and white with my health and how I did things, and even how I operated. And if that plan was altered, or, I had to pivot, I almost just threw in the towel because my perfectly curated plan wasn't going to be able to go over the way that I wanted. And so there was no like gray area. There was no, I can still do this, but it doesn't have to be 100%. And, I look at this in my fitness because I have to be flexible as a mom, and it cannot take up the biggest piece of the pie that, it used to. Not that that was a healthy thing, but there's so much in my life that needs and thrives on flexibility. And so having this idea that I can still execute, and it doesn't always have to be all or nothing. And I also use that in my business. I sometimes get a little bit frustrated just with I don't know if it's my drive or like the gritty piece of my personality, but my capacity to do all the things that I want to do, because I do have big dreams and aspirations for myself, but I'm also so focused on my kids, and they always come first. And so it's kind of juggling that balance for me. And using all or something means I can do it, and I'm doing it. But if it's not at the capacity that I would like, it doesn't mean that I stop.
So give me an example. For some reason, I have like odd ones of like family photos didn't go exactly the way you wanted, or something like that, which I'm sure maybe fits that scenario. But like, what's a more recent example of like all or nothing or all of something?
Oh, let's see. A recent example. I will just give the example of, I had a photo shoot scheduled, and it was actually just a brand photo shoot for a bit project that I'm working on. And of course, the day that it's scheduled, I have a kid sick home. And, even now it's like, I'm flexible, we can adapt, but you have these expectations, and obviously something that's been booked forever is in the works. And we had to completely shift gears, and that photo shoot ended up coming to my house. I had a child there, and I could have easily just said, scrap it. It's gone. It's not going to work. I'm going to reschedule for 2 months out. But that of course would put off this project. And, that's a silly example, but it's with kids, I have to realize that it's never an inconvenience. They'll always come first. And so this being flexible with your methods, and sometimes it means that I'm called home early from the gym, and I am doing squats with a 5-year-old in my arms because I want to finish it, but doesn't mean that I just don't finish the workout. Like, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to be flexible with how I do it. I think that mindset with myself and with many of my clients, it goes so far.
So let's drill into the moment here, because I don't know, I'm putting myself in your situation, and I totally hear what you're saying. What's that feel like in the moment where you have to make this decision of like, screw it, let's abort, versus like, all right, we'll work with this? Like, is it a frustrating feeling? Is it anxiety? Is it like you want to scream? Like, what's it feel like in the moment? Like, put us in that moment of like how you're feeling in there.
Yeah, it's funny because all of the above. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm almost so exhausted that I don't even want to have to make alterations to this existing event that now has to be rescheduled. It's anxiety. It's feeling almost the burden of having to put other people out. It's all of it. And so I think those moments are really when we have to coach ourselves. And no matter what, I think that some things become easier, but they never become automatic. Like that's where the mindset, you have to take control of the narrative, because it's so easy to let that narrative just spiral downward and say, screw it, and that's probably easier in the moment oftentimes. Dependent on it, it doesn't depend, it doesn't matter what it is. Foregoing something feels easier, it feels comfortable, but that's also not getting you to where you want to go. It's not productive often. I think being able to change the narrative in the moment is everything. And the only thing I can say about that is it just has taken practice. I've literally taught myself.
But is it like breath work that you're doing? Like, I mean, I know how I do it in the moment, and like I think I do focus on my breath. I don't probably do it quite the more technical breathing way, but yeah, I mean, I think angst picks in, frustration picks in, and like you have like this sort of fork, if you will, metaphorically speaking, and like I don't know, like so for you, like you acknowledge this feeling you're having, it's undesirable. You're but what else are you doing? Like, are you working on your breath work here? Are you like pausing? Like, do you have like 5 minutes of like don't make a decision yet, think this through, Abby? Like what
Yeah, am I throwing my phone across the room? No, I think have you read the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins? Have you read that?
I've listened to a lot of her podcasts. I haven't actually read that particular book though.
So that's a book I read years ago, but I also am a huge Mel Robbins fan.
Yeah,
I just
great.
listen to it all the time. And the 5-second rule is essentially, before you make a decision, give yourself 5 seconds to breathe before reacting. And I always do that. And funny enough, my kids know that too. 5-second rule, take 5 seconds. And it's stopping and pausing before you react, before you make a decision. And sometimes it has to be longer than 5 minutes. But, I think knowing how it's interesting as a coach, because so often I can teach these things really, really well, but it doesn't mean that it's easy for me to do. And sometimes it fuels my fire, because I have to remember, if I'm going to preach these things, like I've got to do them myself. And I always just think to myself, do the task at hand. Like what needs to be handled right now. Don't think about the aftermath of how it's going to inconvenience all these other things. Do what you have to do in the moment, after taking 5 seconds to have your second to not react, and then make the best decision in the moment. And don't make the decision based on what's comfortable. They're two separate things, yeah. Right? Sometimes the right decision is not always the comfortable one. And I think being able to kind of coach my clients on that too, I think most often what we want is the most uncomfortable thing to do. It's the whole idea of, it goes back to delayed gratification. I knew the repercussions of me not rescheduling and taking the time to do that would be worse. So
do you find yourself, when you make this decision, and let's say it's not going according to plan, and you've recognized like, okay, whatever it is I planned, it's not going to happen the way that I want it. Do you find yourself like resentful of like, I'm just thinking of there's not many things that I'm like, I mean, I'm pretty like OCD in that regard, but like my runs would be a good example. It's rare that I have a run scheduled, and I'm a big believer, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I mean, we've had fires like in Sonoma County, and I'm like, today's a run day. Like I've got to find a way. Like, I mean, it's that crazy, but I find myself like being sort of in a bad mood if like what I set out to do doesn't actually get done. Not the like little deviations, but when I literally be like, okay, this just is not in the cards for today. Complete like audible on this one. Like I have a hard time bouncing back and being like, well, great. Well, how do we just be go lucky in the moment that we're on a whole new path? I'm like, no, screw that. I'm not doing what I want to do, but I'm angry about it. Like, do you find yourself resentful for it at all, or?
Oh, that's such a funny question, and a great question, because I think about my marriage, and I think about my husband, because it's interesting that we are very similar people, and they say opposites attract. We are both very similar in the sense of we like our routine. We're pretty competitive, not with each other, but we're kind of like go-getters, we like our things, and we've had to adapt and be flexible with each other. But when he can't go on his long run because the kids have XYZ, or when my schedule gets altered and I'm not able to do what I want to do, it has taken so much work from both ends to not hold that over our family's, aura that I'm pissed, like this totally affected me and I'm put out and I'm not happy with this decision. And I think that is something I think motherhood has just taught me, that like what's important here, right? Like I have an able body. I'm going to be able to pick up my run next week and it is what it is. But I think I have little eyes watching me all the time. And if they see my disappointment just completely affecting everything else in the day, then they're going to take that same, they're little sponges. They'll do the same when something doesn't go their way and their expectation wasn't met, and they have to choose their attitude. And attitude it's everything. And it's also really, really hard. I think the other thing too, and I just had a podcast that we put out on perfectionism, because I always call myself a recovering perfectionist. There's so many things in my life that I am consciously choosing to do differently, because I think perfectionism is one of those things that prevented me from being able to be flexible oftentimes, and I don't want to be that way. I didn't want, and I think a lot of that stems from like, how do I want to show up for my kids, for myself? How do I want the energy to be in our home? And so I've taken the light off myself and kind of turned it on. All right, I have little eyes watching me. But don't get me wrong, there are plenty of times when, yes, like that schedule gets altered and mom's not happy. It's a running joke in our house that if mom or dad didn't exercise today, don't cross paths with them.
Oh my God. Yeah. We're very similar over here too. My wife is, I've been with her for 20, God, I should know how many years, like 20, 24 years now. And so I think she knows me pretty well, of like, make sure he gets his run, like, I mean, she'll take care of dinner by herself. She'll whatever needs to happen. If there's an audible called in the day and it's a run day, she will literally clear the road for me and make it happen, because she recognizes how important it is. So I think it's good to have a support system on that. Final few questions here. Are there any habits or mindsets that you're trying to break or trying to build at this moment? Like, are there any that are sort of like in development, if you will, construction or deconstruction?
Yes. Let's start with deconstruction first, and then we'll end on a high note. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, deconstruction, I touched on this earlier a little bit, but my phone, and not so much, I'm not a consumer. I don't really ever get on social media and scroll. That's never been my thing. But I think as a creator, I'm pulled to connect, to answer, DMs and clients, and whether it be email or social media, it's that habitual pull to this. And I'm really mindful of it. And so it's bothering me that sometimes I do it out of habit. Even if it's across the room, somehow I'll like carry the laundry basket over to where it's docked just to make sure, and I think we live in a world that's the norm, and I don't want to be the norm. I think there's a lot of power in disconnecting. I do my best to disconnect on the weekends, but I've found myself lately kind of not keeping my boundaries. And that's something I'm working on. So that's the deconstruction. Okay. Construction, ironically, I'm really trying to build a meditation practice. Okay. And it is not easy. So like you said, some habits do not come naturally to us. I'm looking at like alternative routes. I'm like, there's walking meditation. That might work better for me. But stillness is important. I talk a lot about, creating white space in your day and just tuning out the noise. I'm on Insight Timer, and there's a couple meditations, and I literally have 3 that I just listen to over and over again. And I'm developing the practice. I'm really bad at it, but I'm trying, because I know the value that's there, and it doesn't come naturally, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Don't know too much about the meditation world. However, I will say this, the little, and I may not have given it a fair shake. Well, I probably didn't. I find it very, very challenging to be still, not be still with my thoughts, but just be still. And so I read this book called Deep Work. I think it's Carl Newman. I may get the author, but the book is called Deep Work. And he said something that, I don't know, I interpreted it a certain way, and I'm just running with it, literally running with it. And he said productive meditation. So doing a physical activity where you can separate the physical from the mental allows you to be in a more meditative state. And so the runs that I do are very habitual. Like I run the same routes. I could probably run 9 miles blindfolded at this point because I've done it 1,000 times. And the reason I do it, other than I'm limited in routes where I'm at, but there's no thought that goes into it. The crossing the road, I know every little divot and whatnot in the road. And so I don't have to put almost any thought into the 9 miles. I just have to press go. And it gives me the ability mentally to just go wherever I want. And I'll use a lot of those runs as ways to work out stuff. And, thoughts are like clouds in the sky. You just watch them and observe them. So there's ways that I've learned to do that, but I've really latched onto the productive meditation. I'm maybe I just wasn't meant to sit down and listen to, Headspace or whatnot. I'm a runner. I'm in nature. That's close enough. So I'm running with that, but maybe productive meditation is the way to go. So
you just gave me a golden nugget, Chris. That's my thing. Productive meditation. I love it. It is. It's similar to a walking meditation, right? Yeah. It's something that, because I'm with you. I mean, yes, it is hard to sometimes be in my thoughts, but sitting still, not my forte. I'm a mover. I'm a go. I just don't do well with that, but it's also why I know it's important. So productive meditation might be where we start. Maybe we'll get better.
Yeah, and if there's anybody listening to this that is deeply into meditation that thinks I am completely off here and would like to argue the merits of, no, you really are missing out, I would love to hear it, because I have not read a meditation book. So once again, I just took a little snippet and I'm running with it because it felt very comfortable for me and it feels like it does the job. So last question I got for you. In all that you know about habits and mindsets, when you think of, this is a big question, but when you think of the challenges we face as society, I mean, there are so many, right? But when you think of on a global level, all the issues we run into as humans dealing with each other, if you could just wave a wand over humanity and you could instill this habit into all people with the hope of nudging us in a more loving and kind direction, what would that habit or mindset be?
I would say to be still. And what I mean by be still is, ironically, we just talked about how we can't sit still. But I think be still means listening to our thoughts and being with ourselves without constantly being connected to something. I think we live in a society that we're so plugged in all the time that oftentimes we're just disconnected from our minds and our bodies, and we don't realize it. And being still means being able to cultivate a practice that allows you to understand yourself. What does that look like? Are you following the world or society, or are you following yourself and your true desires? And I think that's something that all of us could benefit from.
That's awesome. We're most likely going to have to do a round 2 of this at one point, because
clearly I got to have you on my podcast, Chris. You'll come over to Uncommon Wellness, and then I'll come back for round 2.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to do that. Well, before we go, where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, my main hub for connection is Instagram. And I also have a website. It is www.uncommon.co. Don't confuse that with .com. But my Instagram is just Abby DeGraff _. And that is where I share a lot of my mindset, habits, coaching practices. I also have a brand that I founded just a couple months ago called Uncommon. And that's where my coaching lives, all my offerings. So
Awesome. Well, we'll have everything in the show notes. And, I've been following you for about a year. I may not comment on everything because a little bit like you, like I sort of like post and ghost, if you will, because I don't believe social media is always the most positive thing, ironically, that I'm building a social platform, but your content's great. And what I love about it is the fact that you talk about so many different things that are practical. I know it is a little bit more geared towards women for sure, but there's so much practicality in the things that you express in there that I think are very universal, even if your clients may be more for sort of moms and whatnot. So I really resonate with it. I think you and my wife would totally hit it off. Like, so much of what you stand for and what you do is literally what we go through. And we do not have 4 boys, we have 2. And I don't know how you do it. So
hey, it's all hard. It's all what you know, and it's all relative. So I just appreciate you having me on, and it's been so incredible getting to know you and this amazing platform that you're building.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Standard. Before we go, click on the link in the show notes of this episode to learn more about today's guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it as well.